think the first thing that's distinctive about Francis's idea of a concept, the culture of encounter, is that it includes a series of other ideas or concepts that are interrelated, which I think will come across in the rest of the presentation. Human fraternity, inclusive citizenship, and social peace. However, it always begins with encounter, with being ready, learning to go outside ourselves, beyond ourselves, and have an encounter with others. Why? The Pope asks. Because faith is an encounter with Jesus Christ, and we must do what Jesus does, encounter others. And then he says, for those who are Christians, they need to go out from the church and into the world, which of course was the central message of the Second Vatican Council. So the culture of encounter begins with what scholars of international relations call the individual level of analysis, encountering God himself, and also encountering our fellow human beings, beginning with those most in need, the marginalized, those at the level of analysis of the society and the state. But this continues to the level of analysis of international relations, the international system. In other words, the culture of encounter is relevant to all of these multiple levels of analysis in the study of international politics. The second thing that's distinctive is that the culture of encounter and its related ideas that I've mentioned are action-oriented right from the outset. They're not merely ethical propositions, declarative statements, but they all have their origins and were initially developed in concrete ways by Bergoglio during the series of crises in Argentina. Bergoglio and other religious leaders of all kinds realized amidst Argentina's political and economic collapse that religious engagement, interreligious dialogue, in collaboration with multiple actors, secular and religious, operating at these multiple levels of analysis was really needed. So, common religious declarations among them at the state level through religious leaders themselves and interreligious dialogue accompanied specific actions at the grassroots to meet immediate needs, which only then could they begin to think about building institutions as a part of a long-term vision of ongoing local, social, and economic and spiritual ways of an impact to transform communities. And so now, as Pope, what is Francis doing? He's applying, he's adapting these key ideas of the culture of encounter to global issues in international relations. So if Pope Francis is an idealist, given what happened in Argentina, he's an idealist without illusions, okay? And the third thing comes from Diego Fares, a Jesuit who's worked with Bergoglio for 40 years. The concept of the culture of encounter is united to another key concept, God's holy faithful people. And this is quite distinctive because it's a part of Argentine theology of the people. God's holy faithful people are ordinary, faithful people, many on the margins of society, who express their religion in their everyday practices and spirituality. But Pope Francis sees these kind of concepts, including the God's faithful holy people, as transferable concepts, and that's key. Transferable concepts for a globalizing world, since this is how he referred to the Iraqi Christians in his homily celebrating Mass in Erbil at the conclusion of his apostolic journey to Iraq in March 2021. And finally, I think it's important to focus on what may be distinctive about Pope Francis's concept of the culture of encounter. But I also think it's firmly grounded in the practices of the modern papacy as it engaged with the globalizing world. In other words, Pope Francis is building on the documents of the Second Vatican Council, Gaudium et Spes, the church in the world, Nostra Aetate, the declaration of the relations with non-Christian religions. Paul the Sixth pilgrimage as the first modern pope to visit Jerusalem and the Holy Land, which has now become a journey for every single pope since then. John Paul II's Spirit of Assisi meetings and his remarkable address at the invitation of King Hassan to speak to 80,000 young Muslims in Morocco in 1985. And then Benedict XVI's Regensburg lecture on the common human dilemma of the dangers of both violence in the name of nationalism and violence in the name of religion. And of course, these dangers concerned both Pope Francis and Grand Imam Ahmed al-Tayyab in their contribution that they put together, the document on human fraternity in 2019. When I first heard that Pope Francis would talk about the culture of encounter, I was delighted and surprised, since this is the way Francis of Assisi performed the gospel life. And a lot of my writing, research, and speaking over the last 15 years has been on St. Francis, the Franciscans, interreligious dialogue, and the theory of international relations. Now, St. Francis was far more intuitive than analytical, but the culture of encounter was reflected in his life story or narrative, indicates a kind of series of basic elements of a radical, holistic, integrative, could say even perhaps Franciscan model of peacemaking, interreligious dialogue, and international relations. Encounter, conversion, knowledge, and transformation. A kind of series, if you will, of concentric circles of encounter, moving outward towards others, if you will, to interreligious dialogue, further encounters, then moving inward towards the relationship of how this fits in with spirituality, to deeper conversion, knowledge, understanding, and transformation. Francis of Assisi, I think, demonstrates in his life story that conversion was not a single event. It was a series of these encounters, responding to his world of anarchy, violence, and poverty, beginning with military events like being a soldier, prisoner of war, his encounter with Christ in the Church of San Damiano, but then leading to riskier encounters with the leper, the poor, leading to deeper conversions, and the key, the discovery of new knowledge, that authentic knowledge about how society in the world really works, comes from the margins, the bottom, and not the top of society. And this leads to more transformations. His dream of Spoleto, when he finally gave up his military ambitions to be a knight, or in our terms, to give up the cultural model of success for young men of his age. So what are the cultural models of success for all of us in our age? But as a result of that, he ended up taking riskier encounters, finally meeting the riskiest encounter of all, the Sultan al-Malik al-Kamal of Egypt, allegedly the enemy of Christendom. And the same can be said for Bergoglio in Argentina. Pope Francis. People on the margins of society, they're important, of course, because of their inherent dignity as being created in the image of God. But Bergoglio also emphasizes they're important because we need to be hearing what they say, listening to them is a way of attaining new knowledge regarding their needs, what's really going on in society. Remember, truth is an encounter. It's the title of the homilies at Santa Marta. So when he talks about the poor in the periphery, Bergoglio says they have and this isn't from Fratelli Tutti, they have another way of looking at things. They see aspects of reality that are invisible to the centers of power where weighty decisions are made. But then going back when he was a Jesuit provincial, I think I have to say this. He insisted that elites of all kinds, religious, political, and academic, he says, need to reject the absurd idea of giving voice to a people as if they had none of their own. All peoples have a voice, even if it's been reduced to a whisper by oppression. We must sharpen our hearing and listen to that voice and not speak in their place. Now, what's the upshot? St. Francis Pope Francis, the encounter of going outside ourselves, beyond ourselves, can lead to a new radical social epistemology, or a radical Franciscan social epistemology. Knowledge about how the world really works comes from the bottom and not the top. And this new knowledge can lead to new and increasingly radical forms of human solidarity, new concerns for inclusive citizenship, and concerns for social peace. However, when individuals do go out beyond themselves, who do they encounter, of course? The Pope says the poor, the marginalized, those who think differently, have different beliefs, and belong to different religions. It is then through faith, dialogue, and diversity at these multiple levels of analysis I've talked about, the Pope said we can create a culture of encounter, a culture of friendship, in which we find brothers and sisters, since what we all have in common is that we create in the image of God. So this represents a new radical form of social ontology, a radical Franciscan social ontology, as the counterpart to this radical social epistemology, since encounter, new knowledge, can transform and expand who to engage with, new actors who in the past may have been excluded, ignored, or marginalized in international relations. I was unexpectedly faced with a new opportunity for Catholic dialogue with the Shiite Islamic tradition. When the book I published some years ago, The Global Resurgence of Religion and the Transformation of International Relations, was translated into Persian. And it was the subject of an initial seminar and sort of ongoing conversations with a young, enthusiastic translator who spoke perfect English, or what sounded to me like perfect American English, I have to say, and a variety of Shiite scholars and students from different parts of the world. And I think what one learns is that honesty matters, difference matters, and engagement matters. And it raises questions between these people in this kind of dialogue and discussions. Who am I? Who are you? Who are we? And I point in that context, I think, to the model of the encounter between St. Francis and the Sultan of Egypt. I'm thinking here specifically of Islam, and that'll be the example that I've used. How through our engagement, through our dialogue, through my engagement with my Muslim brother, can I become a better Christian, a better Catholic? And how can my Muslim brother, by his engagement with me, become a better Muslim? Because I think this for me indicates an importance about integrity and the meaning and purpose of such a dialogue. And I think it fits in with what I've said earlier about this link between spirituality, the inside, the outside of encounter, through interreligious dialogue going back. And it fits with Pope Francis's ideas of the Argentine theology of the people. First of all, I think that the project of creating a culture of encounter offers an opportunity to take forward the creative possibilities offered by the papacy of Pope Francis. Interreligious dialogue, of course, has always been about doctrines, but especially now in this papacy, there is interreligious collaboration on global issues, which I think has turned the corner, and I suspect it'll outlive this pontificate. The second thing is, I think, as a culture, or the culture of encounter, as a culture, it's a way of living. It's a way of living in the world. It's not a project with things to do. And it's also inextricably connected to international political economy, which we haven't talked about. It's connected, in other words, to Pope Francis's idea of a world without bonds in a globalizing world, We're losing the bonds between people at all levels of analysis. And he talks about this in Fratelli Tutti. But it's still action-oriented and has quite practical applications. But a culture of encounter, it seems to me, is not the same as mobilizing on global issues like climate change, global health, or refugees, and a series of other issues. It's about creating a culture which facilitates this mobilization, but it begins with encounter as a way of living, which facilitates new knowledge. And for me, this is this idea of theory as everyday social practice. Every day, each of us live out a theory of international relations by the way we live, what we eat, the clothes we wear, how we travel. This connects our daily living to all of these global issues. And I also think it's this awareness that links both St. Francis in his times and Pope Francis in our times. They came to see and interpret what was going on in the world around them in these new ways with these kinds of connections, both in their own times, in their own worlds. And next, I think surrounding these issues, whether it's climate change, health, refugees, there's too much fear and not enough hope connected with these global issues, okay? So if we think about these issues in relation to the question, what is human agency on this global issue in Bergoglio's or Pope Francis's political anthropology? And this is where it gets interesting. Agency for Bergoglio, or Pope Francis, is the way vision, creativity, and imagination by anyone as an individual, or more often as part of a group or as part of a people, theology of the people there, can mobilize, collaborate as an active dimension of hope at each of these levels of analysis on new creative activities to meet immediate needs, develop specific projects, and even to build new institutions over the long term. And like I said, when I began talking about Argentina, this is not a theory and not an aspiration. The culture of encounter, this way of living was for Bergoglio, how he actually did live his life. It's what he did in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, as a megacity in a globalizing world. We forget that he's the first pope from a megacity. Finally, in relation to the question, I'd like to go back to a quote that was one of the quotations that was sent around to us to comment on, to think about. And this has to do with Pope Francis' concept of the many-faceted polyhedron. And I'm wondering if one can talk about these global issues or talk about global issues in the geometry of the culture of encounter. Fratelli Tutti states that if people are in dialogue with those they encounter around them at every level of analysis, there is, he says, the opportunity to express our innate sense of fraternity. And in a variety of encounters, we have the space we need for co-responsibility in creating and putting in place new processes of changes. There is also the space to act boldly and creatively with new ideas, new projects to promote healing, reconciliation, and economic well-being. In other words, it is in spaces such as these that religious engagement, secular religious partnerships can offer the funding, facilitation, and support for the kind of human agency, vision, creativity, and imagination which emerge from these new forms of encounter and fraternity through interreligious dialogue and collaboration at all of these levels of analysis. especially grassroots level. At the same time, religious engagement, interreligious dialogue, and collaboration bring to governments new knowledge from the grassroots level through these partnerships. And they extend this knowledge, for better or for worse, for working on a series of these kinds of global issues. So there's direct policy implications from this understanding of a radical social epistemology and a radical social ontology, which I think fits with the lived experience of both St. Francis and Pope Francis. And so the global issues and this geometry of the culture of encounter, I think, speak to the common resonance of these religious traditions in an authentic ways in the globalizing world, and speak to the wider global reach of Pope Francis and the modern papacy in a globalizing world.